Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Nordic Climate Weeks. The next debate we will have is Sustainable Finance, the Nordic Way. My name is Jukka Ahonen. I'm head of communications of the Nordic Investment Bank. We have today three audiences. We have one here in Stockholm, then we have one in Madrid, and then we have one online. There is an increasing alarm that the path we are on is not sustainable. Actually, I guess that most of you know the iconic song by AC/DC from 1979, where Bon Scott is singing, "No stop signs, speed limit, nobody's gonna slow me down." I think that that somehow captures actually the essence, the whole narrative of our times. If we do nothing, we actually might be on a very, very slippery slope. But fortunately, something has happened and something is happening, and probably the most important signs that we have on our path are the Paris Agreement and the UN SDGs. But what can we do here in the Nordics to reduce the global emissions? Should we focus more on our own region, or should we go there where the impact per dollar is the biggest? That's one of the questions that we are going to discuss today. And what is the role of finance in this debate? Let me first introduce our lineup here in Stockholm. The first speaker here will be Mr. Kjell Nilsson. He's a director from Nordic and affiliated professor of the University of Copenhagen. The second participant is Susanna Campbell. She's an investor, former CEO of Ratos. She's here in her capacity as the board member of Northvolt. Next to her, we have Thomas Rangdahl, who is the first vice president and head of lending at the Nordic Investment Bank. And then we will move to Madrid. In Madrid, we will have Pekka Moren. Hi, Pekka. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Is everything fine there?
Yes, we have about 30-40 people here in Madrid, so we're ready.
That's great, that's great. And there's one person who will join later, and this is the professor Nicholas Stern. He should be there 3:30 if we are lucky. Is that true, Pekka? Is that the case?
Maybe not sharp, but he will be here.
Okay, so we'll see when he arrives, and then we are going to sort of give him the floor. All right, let's start now with the basic question that we will be discussing today. Kjell, representing the Nordic region, which is climate policies in the Nordics. And based on that study, I would like for you to give us some shed a little bit light on that. What is the best way for the Nordics to reduce global emissions?
No. Okay. First, I would like to say that Nordic economic policy review is not exactly a study carried out by Nordic. We are facilitating the report. It's actually authored by scientists, economic scientists from the different Nordic countries. And it's also edited by two economists. I'm not economist myself, but the two editors certainly are Professor Lars Calmfors and John Hassler, both from Stockholm University. So they have been editing this report. And I would like to focus on 3 of the 5 chapters, which are focusing, as I see it, on quite crucial questions when it comes to the efficiency of Nordic climate policies from an economical point of view. And the first chapter that I would like to discuss is exactly what Jukka was referring to. Because climate emissions or CO2 emissions are specific in the way that they are spread globally completely. So it doesn't matter where they come from. They affect us all more or less equally. Otherwise, when it comes to pollution, it normally hits the closest neighbors most seriously. But in this way, it doesn't matter. It's a global phenomenon. And then the discussion, of course, is where do you reduce most carbon dioxide for a certain amount of money? And this is a question, of course, for the reduction costs. The reduction costs are much higher since we are already have reduced so much in the Nordic countries, for example. While in other countries, you can get much more reduction by investing there instead. And there is a emission trading going on, as you probably all are familiar with. And a part of this trading, the so-called effort sharing regulation, there you have differences, large differences when it comes to the costs between, within EU, for example, between the Nordic countries and especially the Eastern European countries. And then one conclusion in this, or a recommendation from the two scientists, Björn Kallén and Bengt Kriström, was that the Nordic countries should put much more effort into actually this trading of emissions than trying to reduce as much as possible at home. When this was presented at the launch in Copenhagen in May, there were two former Minister of Environment present at the presentation and participating in the debate afterwards. And they meant actually that it would be more or less disastrous for the credibility of the Nordic countries if we gave up, so to say, our high ambitions and instead put our resources into trading. So then the question is, should we act as a forerunner, or should we use our money where we can reduce most CO2? If there, you can say the ideas goes a little opposite between at least the environmental politicians and the economics expertise. Then it's not the case when it comes to the development of clean technology. There could be two reasons actually why we should invest in more efficient clean technology. One is a more altruistic part, that we want to help to save the world, or the other is that here is a huge business opportunity. And of course, from an economic point of view, they are pointing at the possibility that lies in promoting and developing green technology from the Nordic countries and the possibilities for that. And the third part of the discussions actually went a little when it comes to our own consumption and production of and the CO2 effects of that. That is, should we subsidize good solutions, or should we punish or tax the consumption of that causes CO2 emissions? And in that case, the economists, most of them, are actually saying that we should they prefer the tax system because then the consumer can choose the right solution by themselves. And this was a Norwegian researcher, Katinka Holsmark. She took actually the subsidies of electric cars in Norway as an example. And she meant that that is an extremely expensive way of reducing CO2. And also that you capture people, or you keep people into reliance on cars, instead of saying that, okay, higher the taxes instead of fossil fuels, and then people can choose themselves. So and then she pointed, if Norway really wants to do something, then they should reduce their oil production. So, and that is, of course, nothing you can do like that, but you can stop the forest out, so to say, resources that you haven't exploited yet. So actually, to sum up with this, you can say there is a cost-effectiveness question regarding most CO2 reduction for the money on the one hand, and front-runner perspective. We have to, we show the way that it's possible to combine economic development and reduction of CO2. I would say in this case, it's a question of both. You have to do both. I mean, you have to be efficient when you invest your resources, but the consequences on a global scale, it is at least as important that we keep being forerunners. And then we can, of course, also say that we still are quite high per capita consumers, or emission product. And then, as I said, everybody agrees on the green technology and the, so to say, both the effects by spreading, by exporting solutions that can be used all over the world. That is no doubt from any side that is a wise way to go, and it's also, from a business point of view, good for employment and our industry.
All right, thank you, Jill. I have some questions for you, but you can also think if you have any questions. I will immediately start one question: that where do you see the most promising sectors of flagship projects in the Nordics, if you think about this front-runner aspect?
Yeah, I mentioned Mats Graeker and the second example of green technology. He mentions in that energy sector, wind energy production, also battery production actually, and development of different methods for carbon storage. These are the three examples that he takes up, and what he says that is important, he actually asks for more Nordic cooperation, more common Nordic initiatives. Now each country are supporting this technology development on their own in many cases. There should be more Nordic cooperation in this, he says.
Any questions at this stage from the audience? And I could have one more follow-up on you mentioned the Nordics having high CO2 emissions per capita. Where do you see the dark spots in the Nordics?
I'm not sure, but if you look at the CO2 emissions as such, it is it's the transportation, it is iron steel, it's cement production. So, I mean, you should go where, if you look at least from an economics point of view here, where you have the largest amounts of emissions, actually.
All right. Moving on to Susanna, we are talking now about this front-runner aspect of these Nordic climate solutions. And of course, we would like to hear about Northvolt, which is very famous for this very exciting Nordic project, namely building this battery factory in the Swedish Lapland. I think that this sounds a little bit like that could be in line with the philosophy that Kjell has just sort of outlined. So, Susanna, please tell us about the project.
Yes, thank you. Well, first, I would say that I very much, personally, I'm a strong believer in businesses that are growing and profitable and also do good. So I think we'll see growth within that sector and those kind of companies very much in the years to come. And there is where I also feel that Northvolt is, because we truly want to make a difference and drive CO2 out of the transportation value chain. Our ambition is to manufacture the world's greenest batteries. And what do we mean by that? Well, first of all, we take an integrated approach from the mine to the battery. Battery production is a very energy-consuming production process. So we're going to use green energy, and particularly in Skellefteå, of course, hydropower, given where we're going to be located. And then in the end, also, we're going to focus very much on the recycling end of things, because that's the last bit of the puzzle that we believe needs to be solved for battery production and electric vehicles of different sorts to become really, truly green. Northvolt was founded about 3 years ago by Peter Carlsson and Paolo Cerruti, who had a Tesla background, both of them, where they saw this need for the battery supply chain to develop significantly in Europe. And today, only 3 years later, we're a team of over 500 people. So we have the head office here in Stockholm, but now also spread out on the other different offices. We are over 50 nationalities of these in these 500 people, so people from over 50 countries. We have an industry-leading R&D team. Most of them are actually from Asia, so from Japan and South Korea predominantly. So I think Northvolt has done a uniquely good job at attracting international talent to this mission that we have to both make a change for Europe, but also obviously, again, to drive CO2 out of the transportation value chain. We are currently about 1 week away from starting our production in Västerås, the Northvolt Labs short series production facility that we have just an hour west of Stockholm. That one was financed with the support from EIB, but also from our very strong industrial partners like ABB, Siemens, Scania, Vestas, and BMW. So very much a mix of public and private capital supporting us in this. We have also started construction in Skellefteå and going to start production there in 2021. So some way to go, but we started production fully this summer only. So we've been going for not even 6 months there. Here too, we have EIB as a key partner in the financing. In total, EIB have committed about 400 million euros to this project. Very valuable, obviously, to us. We also closed a record big equity financing round in June this year of $1 billion, where we got key partners like Volkswagen, Goldman Sachs, and also, and those two partners are on the board as well right now. But we also have other partners like BMW and pension investors, pension money like Swedish AMF and Folksam and Danish ATP. So here again, a mix of public and private capital needed to support this entrepreneurial project, and production to start 2021. During these 3 years, we have signed $13 billion in orders from customers. So that's obviously the basis on which we can finance this huge investment in northern Sweden. Apart from this, it's been an eventful 3 years, as I'm sure you understand. We also have established a joint venture down in Poland, a 50-50 joint venture, where we're doing our battery pack production. So there we have battery packs already producing, but of course with external cells. And over time, we expect to be able to supply our own cells to that production there. We have also established a 50-50 joint venture with Volkswagen down in Germany that has a slightly later time schedule than the Skellefteå plant, but we intend to build a gigafactory together with Volkswagen down in Germany as well. This is an amazing journey, and we're not done yet. You know, Peter Carlsson was out in the FT last week, I think it was, announcing that we had even higher ambition. I think it said 125 gigawatt hours in total capacity, and we're going to build up to 40 up in Skellefteå, so you understand that there are several facilities yet to come. But our mission is clear, and we believe that you can make very good, profitable business, but also do a heap of good in terms of taking out CO2.
Susanna, we are talking today about sustainable finance. So you already mentioned the sources of finance, but how do you get money for this project? How does it really work, those financing rounds? And then maybe another question that What are the risks and challenges with this kind of? It's a very bold project.
In terms of financing, I would lie if I said it had been easy. I've spent a fair bit of time working on that myself as an advisor over these 3 years. I would say that we've had very many good dialogues. We're very much dependent on both private and public capital to support. I guess we're a square thing trying to fit into a round hole to a certain extent. These kind of huge industrial projects, being a startup, are very unusual. But I would say we've had very good support from the EU in terms of wanting to drive this agenda. It's extremely important for European job creation, clearly, as well. If you look at it from a long-term perspective, the automotive industry today employs so many people in Europe, and the battery is such a big part of that value chain. So if we lose that whole part, we lose very many jobs. So from the EU, it's been, I think, both the climate agenda, but also the job creation agenda, driving the very valuable support we've received. But I would say our industrial partners, and then now also pure financial investors, really important. That people have shown interest. They've tried to help us to find ways. It requires creativity, both from our side and from our partners' side. And I would say we have needed top-level support from our industrial partners as well. This is nothing. If a couple of times we end up getting stuck in the M&A department of the potential partner, and there we don't really fit in because it's not that kind of an investment. But on a strategic level and understanding where this industry is going and the need for a company like Northvolt on management and board level is where we've got extremely good support and had
What about
good
these
discussions.
challenges and risks in terms of sourcing?
Yes, we have heaps. Financing has been one, and now we've obviously, with the equity financing round we closed in the summer, that was a huge step for us. And getting main investors like Volkswagen and Goldman Sachs, I think we got the best of two worlds, both a financial investor and an industrial, kind of verifying different parts of the business case. But we have a heap to do. The team is working extremely hard right now to get Västerås up and running. Again, first battery coming out of that factory any day now. Construction in Skellefteå, people working extremely hard. We're 500 people today, need to be 1,000 in a year. Recruiting, we have an in-house huge recruitment team working to find the skills and competencies we need. So we have very many challenges and a lot of hard work yet to come.
All right, so we'll continue with the topic of finance. I will now turn to my colleague, Thomas Frangdahl, who is the first vice president and head of lending at the Nordic Investment Bank. It's not a secret that also NIB has been looking at this Northvolt project, and I would like to ask why.
Well, I think Susanna explained that very well in a way, because it's a fantastic, exciting project. It's super important for the Nordic, for Sweden, and for Europe that we create the battery factory capabilities. And I wasn't there from the first day when Northvolt started the ideas, but they were pretty early on actually coming to Nordic Investment Bank and wanted to present the project of a battery factory. And it was at that time rather new started. It's still rather new, but then it was really new started company. And I said, sorry, Nordic Investment Bank, in spite of the fact that we have lending of a portfolio of 20 billion and we're working with renewable projects and we're really focusing on the green transition, we can't finance a new startup venture with no track record and partly new battery ideas, a new product, which is a development of earlier battery system. But you're so welcome to come to Helsinki with some 200 people there and present it, because I think it sounds really interesting. I really want you to come. So please do that if you can. But at this point, you will not receive any financing from NIB. And the team and the management and Peter Carlson and his team, they said, yeah, that's interesting. Let's go to Helsinki and present it. So we had the presentation, and I thought it was really interesting, and I really wanted to follow it up all the time, which we have been doing. And of course, Susanna explained, when Volkswagen comes on board, and Goldman Sachs, and with quite a lot of money and all the knowledge, that was the time where NIB could say, okay, this is something that we should be part of financing as a transitional project. So we're very proud to be part of it, and hope to be able to be part of the financial close on the debt side.
One follow-up question on that. You mentioned that NIB has been mostly financing sort of established companies with a very long track record, and this is of course a very bold kind of startup style, huge sort of initiative. Do you think that there will be more deals or initiatives like this from the NIB's side?
Yeah, I hope so, because this transition is important, and we're going to hear Mr. Stern in a moment here, and I've heard about him before, of course, but I read his report, and that was 2006. And when you read that report, and he will talk about that, I'm sure, you get almost a little bit scared. So this is really important that we make this transition. And financing is sorry to say, it's the base of getting things done. If the financing is not there, things will not be done. And I think Nordic Investment Bank, together with, of course, EIB, who has a little bit more money in their pockets, should be part of that transition, and part of taking also sometimes a little bit more bold move than we would normally do. Then it goes hand in hand. We can't take any bold moves if we don't have the base in our portfolio, and the base is grateful enough also a lot of important financial environmental projects. We have a lot in hydro, we have wind parks, and it all comes together. And talking about Northvolt, it comes nicely together because we're financing also Skellefteå Kraft, which is where Northvolt will get with the power. So we're already financing their hydro and wind parks up there in Lapland. So it sits well together. Well, then you need the mines also. Mine is not what we think about like the most environmental friendly things, but if we don't have the mines, sorry, Northvolt will not be able to make the batteries. So, I mean, we do finance mines also. And we have some of the larger mining companies in Sweden and also in the rest of the Nordic, which is also part and potentially part of Northvolt, another important project like this.
All right. Before we move to Madrid, I could ask one question, Susanna. Is it important for you to have international financial institutions on board as well?
I think with a project this kind of scale, like Northvolt is, and we will obviously, given the plans in Germany and even higher ambitions going forward, we will need money and financing in several different rounds. So I think both local partners like NIB and international partners are key here. And just to emphasize that again, the private public capital mix and some creativity and actually some players wanting to take a little bit more risk maybe on a startup than they're used to, I think is crucial to make the right things happen.
Is there any question from the audience in Stockholm at this stage before we move to Madrid? There is one, yeah. If you bring the mic.
Tom Walsh, Renatec. I was just curious, question for Susanna, in terms of the risks from a resource perspective in terms of supply towards the batteries. What sort of risks do you see there? Some of the regions of the world are actually quite volatile where a lot of this material comes from. Your views on that would be interesting.
Yeah. That is clearly also one of the challenges for us, and something that we have, well, a whole team working on, and something that we from a board level look very carefully at too. So we're trying to find innovative ways of making sure that we have a very clean and tidy supply chain, of course. Cobalt is often mentioned as one of the most challenging minerals that go into batteries, and there, at least for the first 16 gigawatt hours, we're not going to go to need to go to the Congo, for instance, to secure our supply. But it is a challenge, and we'll have to work, I think, again with partners across the industry and together with our partners to solve this going forward. But there's definitely a bunch of entrepreneurship going on in that sector as well. So we're hopeful.
All right, thank you very much. And now I think it's time to move to Madrid. So Pekka should be there, and he's there with Professor Nicholas Stern. How are you? Everything fine there?
Fine. Yes.
Yes.
Everything fine. Yeah.
All right. So I will ask first 2 questions to Pekka, and then we'll move to Professor Stern, if that's fine. So, Pekka, this is the first time when the finance ministers are attending the COP meeting. Can you tell us why?
Well, last February, a group of finance ministries gathered in Helsinki discussing about the ways the finance ministers could be more active and get engaged together as a group with the support of institutional partners to see what could be done to support the COP process and the climate change. And yesterday here we agreed, or the ministers agreed, or it was launched, the action plan. We call it the Santiago Action Plan because it was worked out in Santiago in June. That's where the work started. So yesterday there was a launch of this event with finance ministers for the first time involved, and there were like 400 people in the room, and also Nick Stern was there giving his remarks, and that's why we're here for the first time.
When do we see the first sort of tangible results of this work?
I think what we're talking about here is mainstreaming climate issues into economic and financial policies. There is this very long-term aspect. We need to be very analytical. We need to do our job properly. So there's a lot of learning and doing to do. So there is this element that will take years. But what we're doing now is the coalition is up and running, and the learning and doing, sharing experiences among countries with the support of academia and institutional partners is ongoing. I give an example. For example, green bonds. Many countries have started to issue them during the year on the basis of experiences that successful issuance started by other countries before. That's a concrete issue that already has started to take place.
All right, and then we have some questions for Professor Nicholas Stern. The first question is a follow-up on this finance ministry coalition. That why is it important that finance ministries are getting involved in this work?
We have to understand that by seeing what it is that we have to do. We have to go net zero by mid-century if we want to have a chance of holding to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And for CO2, perhaps 15 or 20 years later, if we're trying to hold to 2 degrees. That is very rapid change. In the next 10 years, we probably have to cut emissions by somewhere between a third and a half, depending on whether we're thinking about well below 2 or 1.5. That is very rapid change. It involves economic change across the whole economy. This is a story of driving down to zero, which requires strong investment in infrastructure, strong investment in housing, strong investment in transport and energy, and so on. So if you're going to change the whole economy at speed, that cannot happen unless the finance ministers, the people who make economic policy, are leading that process. Not simply that they add it on to all the burdens that they have already, but they actually lead that process and think about the kinds of investments are necessary and think about the kinds of policies that will pull through those investments. And that is a very exciting story because we have a world which is demand constrained. We have a world where interest rates are on the floor. We have a world with plenty of saving, but insufficient investment. So this is a story that's very good for the economies of the world in terms of demand. It's very good for the economies of the world in sharpening up the infrastructure, which will give you a much more efficient supply. And it's very good for us all in terms of having cities where we can move and breathe, having ecosystems which are robust and fruitful. So this is a very attractive story. It's a story of rising living standards, a story of inclusion. But I don't want to pretend that it's easy. There are lots of things we have to do. We have to do them quickly. And the people who have the power to set off that process, in my view, the duty to set off the process is the finance ministers. And that's why it's so important, not only to get the policies right, but also to make sure we have the right kind of finance available in the right place at the right time. And of course, the investment banks are enormously important here. And let me close this part of what I wanted to say by saying how much the Nordic countries have contributed to the understanding of the problem and what we have to do, how much they've contributed to the policies that we need to drive that through, carbon pricing being a very clear example, and how much they've contributed to the multilateral development banks and through their own development banks in bringing forward the finance that can make this possible. It has to be much bigger, but the Nordic countries have given us a tremendous start.
Thank you very much. When I have you here, or there in Madrid, I would like to ask you a question which is regarding the Stern Review, which was published in 2006. I remember that you said, for example, that the climate change is the result of the biggest market failure that the world has seen. What has changed since 2006? How do you see this issue now?
That statement hasn't changed. It still is the greatest market failure that the world has seen. And it's still true that the costs of inaction are far, far greater than the costs of action. So those two things are still true. They're even more true than they were at that time, and they were true then, of course. So what has changed? Well, the science looks still more worrying. You might remember that I was accused by some cynics and ignorant people, if I might say so, of exaggerating the risks. I didn't exaggerate the risks. In the Stern Review, we underestimated the risks. They were bigger than we thought. That is a big change. They're bigger than we thought for two reasons. One is that emissions have gone on rising and concentrations, of course, have gone on rising. The second is that many of the effects have come through more severely and more quickly than was anticipated by the science then. So science has been more worrying on top of our inability to turn down the emissions. On the other hand, the technology has moved far more quickly than we thought then. That was 1 year before the iPhone. Now we have the ability to manage energy, transport, city systems, which are so crucial to all this, in a very different way than we could have done then. We have an ability to manage buildings. We have an ability to understand weather and land use. All these things are much better than they were then. We've seen extraordinary falls in the cost of renewables. We've seen the beginnings of the ability to tackle the so-called hard to abate sectors, you know, the use of hydrogen, for example, for long distance surface transport. We're seeing the ability to make steel in different kinds of ways. Sweden's been a leading light in that story. So the technical side, I think, has gone far more quickly than we thought. And that's a tremendous range of opportunities that we now have. The political side, it depends where you look. India and China, I've been working in India for 45 years, China 30 years. Those two very big countries are beginning to change. And we must, as rich countries, walk arm in arm with India and China on trying to bring those changes forward. We have a great deal to do, to learn from each other, many ways in which we can help each other. Rich countries, of course, have an obligation to do that. Politically, in the United States, at least as far as the occupant of the White House, we've gone backwards. But remember that we see so much of the United States that is moving forwards politically. But I think the most important political development is the involvement of young people. My student politics were in the 1960s, and we were angry about Vietnam. We were angry about apartheid. We were trying to work to promote civil rights, particularly in the southern United States. We were very active, and we were on the right side of history. But I think in the meantime, there hasn't always been that level of commitment of young people and students. Now our students are angry, young people are angry, and they're analytically angry because they understand this issue. And I think the pressure they're putting on us is a great source of hope. So some things better, some things worse. I'm optimistic now about what we can do, but I worry deeply about what we will do.
All right, thank you. I think now we can take questions both from here, from Stockholm and from Madrid. So are there some questions there in the back? There's one.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrik Stålgren. I work for the Swedish International Development Agency. I lead a work that we call Power Africa, where we work on supporting renewable energy and energy efficiency in Africa. It's a pleasure to be in a congregation with members such as Nick Stern, and who has been analyzing the challenges that we face for such a long time and with a high impact. However, I feel a bit discouraged when we read about progress in the news, and I'm sure we share that discouragement of the lack of progress. I think the first slide here today was around a message that we basically are on our way to hell, which is quite strong. So of course, the question becomes around, are we having the right models to solve the problems? Where should we look for bold initiatives and leadership in terms of technology, in terms of policy, and now having NIB in the room in terms of financial models? Do we have that courage that is needed to actually bend the curve and to change some of the very, very scary scenarios that we read about? I would like to challenge you, Nick, and other people in the panel to really take the blue sky perspective on how you can contribute to transformative change on the scale that we need to see. Thank you.
Shall I have a go?
So maybe Nick Stern
let me try. I'm sure Pekka and others will want to come in. I think we know a great deal about what we need to do. We need to decarbonize electricity. We need to make much more electricity to help us with transport and heating. We have to make our economies much more efficient, a circular economy strategy being part of that story. We have to invest much more strongly in nature-based, in natural capital, restoring degraded land, reforesting in the right kind of way, of course. So I think we can see what we have to do. We've got the technologies to get moving quickly. So I think we have to think that the big obstacle is the political will, and we have to build a political will. So how do we do that? Well, we have to show clearly what is possible and that it's attractive. We have to show that the risks from not acting are very severe for our children and grandchildren. We have to challenge the ethics of not doing anything. We have to look to religious leaders, political leaders. We have to look to young people to keep up the pressure. So we know enough and we can see enough to get moving very quickly. So we have to build that political will. It has to be by power of argument. It has to be by challenge. But without that political will, it doesn't seem to me that we will make those changes. But I am not despairing about building that political will, because we can see what to do. We do have the young people moving. We have quite good leadership from the Pope and other religious leaders around the world, adding quickly that I'm not a Catholic. But this is a story then where we can see how to build that political will, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes bottom up and it comes top down. So we need generations of leaders who are going to be very clear and strong on this issue. And we need strong pressure from below at the same time. And we need strong examples from firms, examples from cities about what we can do. So that challenge of building the political will is something we should look at directly, think about directly, and show what's possible. I think the Finance Ministers' Coalition is one part of that story.
Okay, is there anyone else from the panel who would like to say something?
Maybe only that when we do all of those things, the environmental aspect is very important, but it needs to go hand in hand with the general economical development of the society and company. So as we call it in NIB, the productivity part. And we have both those elements, because if you don't get that working also, there will be lack of finance capabilities of handling the very important environmental task that we are foreseeing.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. It's a very important point that sustainability is not only about climate, it's also has economic and social aspect, etc. But now we have a question in Madrid, if I have understood
I would just
correctly.
want to agree strongly with that statement that was just made.
Feels good, thank you.
Yeah. So now I understood that we have a question in Madrid.
There is one, yes. Just a second.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Yamaguchi from Mitsubishi Research Institute, Japan.
Could you hold it closer?
Yeah, sorry. Allow me to ask a bit more specific question on the role of the finance sector on carbon capture and storage, of which Norway, I believe, is the front runner. It's a bit hard. It's not a revenue generating project per se. So how would a bank be involved in CCS project? Thank you. And we see the example of Northern Lights project in Norway, so that's why I'm asking.
Do you want to take that?
Juk, I think that question was more directed to the Stockholm panel.
Yes, you can, maybe Thomas.
Yeah, no, we don't have any of those projects right now financed. We are starting to look into it, so I can't actually give a direct answer to your question on how we would do it. We are generally analyzing our project both from the environmental productivity aspects and the profitability, and we put that together. So we need to see the overall view of it, and we have just started to look into those possibilities.
All right.
A strong carbon price should make it profitable.
Exactly.
Can I maybe comment, Jukka, on the previous question, also linking a bit to this, that modeling is very important, and it's going to happen in certain areas. Like we need to analyze the sustainability risks and bring climate into economic forecasting and so forth. But there are also issues that are fairly simple and also reflecting to the experiences from the coalition, where we have 51 members. And take example of carbon pricing. There are countries who have done it many years, and countries who are just developing them. The ideas behind the systems could be fairly simple. Just get it going and start building up a system that you can develop. That's maybe a good example of the fact that not everything is so complex. When you set a price and start measuring things, of course, there are a lot of technical issues, reporting related issues, and that will take time to develop. But basically, there are also easy solutions just to get the policies going.
Are there further questions here from Stockholm? Yes, there's one.
So Claes Lindgren from Kleinmon. So I have a question on green bonds, which was mentioned here before. So there's a big project going on in the EU regarding calling the taxonomy, which sets the framework then for dark green bonds, as I understand it. Now, this makes it very binary. Those who are in that framework and those are out. And the question is to the panel, will we make the transition if we make it this binary, or should we make it more shades of green?
Well, if I may comment from Madrid, because the taxonomy issue is under work during the Finnish presidency. It's been negotiated with the European institutions, and Finnish presidency is going for a solution. That is a good example of European initiative where at the parallel there is also an effort by the European Commission to get also a more global standard on it. And that's extremely important. But the other related topic is also what's happening at the G20 level, led by Mark Carney, as about the climate-related financial disclosure and whether to make that mandatory. That's one aspect also that could get quite global and should get global into the debate, and where also the coalition countries will be discussing that.
I would like to agree with Pekka on that. If you take the task force on climate-related financial disclosure, that is not binary. What it's trying to identify is the climate risk that is involved in each individual financial investment. And that, of course, comes from the climate risk in the companies that are involved. So you can be more risky and you can be less risky. And that's not binary, and that carries a lot more information. If a bank says that 25% of our investments are green and sustainable, I would worry deeply about the other 75%. The challenge is to move the whole thing, and that for some purposes, binary would be okay. Now, only if you meet a very high standard can you call it green in terms of a bond. I think that's a value. But in our analyses and the way we look at these things, I think it has to be more subtle than that.
I think just looking at the company perspective, I still think we have some way to go in terms of understanding the true cost of capital and the return requirements in terms of different companies and different projects, where I still think the CO2 element is being underestimated as a key risk in many companies and projects that are still being, speaking of the 75% that were mentioned.
Thomas, do you want to add something?
No, I mean, we work a lot with the green bond market. We are one of the largest issuer in the Nordic market of green bonds, so we're very much involved, and we base those bonds on the projects that we're financing, which needs to be green. Hopefully Northvolt would be one of them. And then we also are a buyer in the green bond market as an investor, and then we see the analysis done by others and can get the evaluation whether they are dark, middle, or light green. And we tend then to only choose the dark green. So I think it's very important that there is some kind of shades of green, and you can choose as an investor where you want to go. And generally speaking, we should be a little bit careful not excluding all projects that are not fantastically green, because it's a transitional path we need to go on. And in that transition, we need maybe to accept things that are not totally perfect from an environmental view, but are much better than the existing ones.
All right, thanks, Thomas.
There should be some things on the reject list, right? I mean, there are some things like coal without carbon capture and storage that couldn't possibly be any stage of green. So it's a fairly simple matter to say those are not admissible.
Absolutely, and I was going to say, but you have another aspect which is in between LNG for transport for the shipping. That's not. It's carbon. It's not perfect, but it's better than heavy oil. So that's an example of that transitional aspect.
Now I think we have time for one final quick question from either here from Stockholm or from Madrid. Yes, please.
There is one in Madrid.
There's one here.
Okay, very quickly.
Please.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. My name is Ariel Chavez, and my question is for Professor Stern. I would like to know if you know about some instruments, some tools that are viable to assess risk in this green bond investments and when mobilizing climate finance.
So instruments for?
For risk assessment.
Yeah.
And when dealing with green investments, but also with mobilizing climate finance as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the tools that the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, for example, uses make sense. And they're looking at the carbon emissions. They're looking ahead at the strategies for reducing emissions. They're looking at litigation risks. They're looking at physical risks. So I think the toolbox that they put together makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm sure it could be improved, but I think it's a very good starting point.
All right, and then the last quick question from Stockholm.
Søren Wissing from Viking Wind in Denmark. For our own money, we have developed a hybrid system, primarily for developing countries where we produce energy with a small wind turbine and a combination with solar also. And from what I hear now is that now we're finished and we're ready to go to market, but my feeling is that it will be quite a challenge to get finance for this because you need some either seed capital or debt financing. And already going out of the comfort zone for NIB for a project that was scalable for 500 people within 3 years, where should we go looking for people who want to get involved in this more risky part of this sector?
I can start one. I've been part of building up an impact investment arm of at Norrsken, where we're located here, and that could be one place to start. But there are other types of players who take more kind of early VC, early venture capital type risk. But it is a challenge, and I think that's something that needs to be solved going forward, because there are so many good early stage initiatives where it's tough to get financing. So I completely understand. But I can talk to you afterwards and give you tips.
Well, in NIB, we try to develop those capabilities, and we have a discussion with the board on what we can do to take more risk and also in smaller projects. But I would urge you to stay here for the next session and listen to Nefco, because that's our sister company in Helsinki, and they can do also even equity financing and also take on more risky projects. So that's another example.
All right, thank you very much. Now our time is up. And actually one thing that I noticed is that at least personally I was surprised to see how well this link is working between Madrid and Stockholm. So maybe we can stop sort of flying around the world. We can have our events in this form. I think this is a great Nordic solution. We talked a lot what we can do here inside the Nordics. But the next seminar, as Thomas mentioned, is actually a seminar organized by Nefco, and will demonstrate how the Nordics can make an impact outside the region. So I will leave you with the exciting program for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madrid.
Bye-bye. Thank you.